Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy, Roll Good. We are continuing our series on the subclass changes for martial characters in the Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook for 2024. But before we get into that, please, if you have not subscribed to this channel yet and you keep clicking on these videos, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button real quick. It helps my channel out a lot. Today we are talking about the fighter subclasses in the Player's Handbook for 2024, the champions of the Eldritch Knight. So looking at a quick overview of the subclasses, again, every class received 4 subclasses in the Player's Handbook for 2024. The fighter has the Battle Master, the Champion, the Eldritch Knight, and the Psi Warrior. And again, as they said during the playtest times, that the base class changes were designed to make that class feel more like that class, and then subclass changes were, some things were balance changes, and then other things were also added to just make that subclass feel more like that subclass and just be built into the more modern design of classes. So that's why I included these descriptions here. I'm not going to take the time to read them, but if you want to pause and read, feel free to do so. But we're going to go ahead and get started with the Battle Master. So the Battle Master, again, at level 3, it has combat superiority. This is what gives them all of their Battle Master maneuvers. You still get the same number of maneuvers, the same superiority dice at all levels. Save DC is unchanged. This is the exact same feature as it was in 2014, so no real need to kind of go into it here. There has been some minor changes to maneuvers. So Commander Strike says when you take the attack action on your turn, you can replace one of your attacks to direct one of your companions to strike. So this no longer requires a bonus action. It previously required both your action and the bonus action of you to make that happen. This is actually a very good one for like rogues specifically. It allows them to make their off-turn attack as their reaction to get a second sneak attack, which is very good. So if you're playing a Battle Master fighter and you know you're having a rogue who's going to be leveling into rogue a lot to get their sneak attack dice up, definitely be using that on them if you can. Evasive Footwork says as a bonus action you can expend 1 superiority die and take the disengage action. You also roll the die and add the number rolled to your AC until the start of turn. This requires a bonus action, but now allows you to disengage. Lunging Attack says as a bonus action you can expend 1 superiority die and take the dash action. If you move at least 5 feet in a straight line immediately before hitting an enemy with a melee attack, as part of the attack action on your turn, you can add the superiority die to the attack's damage roll. This used to just grant that attack reach, but now it essentially adds just more damage as you move towards that target, sort of like the charge feature, the charger feat. The parry says reduce the damage by the number you roll on your superiority die, plus your strength or dexterity modifier, your choice. So basically you can now choose strength in addition to dexterity, whereas previously it was just dexterity. Pushing Attack says when you hit a creature with an attack roll using a weapon or unarmed strike, the change here is that it now includes unarmed strikes. The Rally Maneuver says that the creature gains temporary hit points equal to the superiority die plus half your fighter level rounded down. It used to be the superiority die plus your charisma modifier. Riposte says or an unarmed strike against the creature, so it now includes unarmed strikes. The same can be said for Sweeping Attack as well as Trip Attack. These all now include unarmed strikes. Other maneuvers had some text changes but were mechanically the same. Maneuvers not in the Player's Handbook for 2024 technically still exist. So if your DM is permitting maneuvers from other supplements, you can definitely use those. The existence of weapon masteries makes some of the must-have maneuvers a little more optional, such as the Trip Attack, which was a very popular maneuver to choose. But if you have the Topple Mastery, then you don't need to choose the Trip maneuver. Moving on to the second level 3 feature, we have Student of War. It says you gain proficiency with one type of artisan's tools of your choice, and you gain proficiency in one skill of your choice from skills that are available to the fighter at level 1. So you grant an additional proficiency to fighters available from the fighter class. And again, notably, if you have a tool check that calls for a specific skill check, and you have proficiency in both the tool and the skill that is required for that role, then you have advantage on the roll. The Dungeon Master's Guide is supposed to have some more guidance on crafting. They did say it's going to be very similar to the non-magical crafting rules in the Player's Handbook for 2024, but the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide will have more guidance on magic items. So if you want to choose an artisan's tool, that might be if you're doing magic item crafting and you want to make sure you have the tool of that choice, you can get it this way. Moving on to the level 7 feature, we have Know Your Enemy. This works pretty, I mean, it's kind of the same idea, but it's a little different in 2024. It says, as a bonus action, you can discern certain strengths and weaknesses of a creature you can see within 30 feet of yourself. You know whether that creature has any immunities, resistances, or vulnerabilities, and if the creature has any, you know what they are. So you not only know that they have immunities, but you know what those immunities are. Same for resistances, same for vulnerabilities. Once you use this feature, you can't do so until you finish a long rest. You can also restore use of this feature by expending one superiority die, no action required. So this is now a bonus action timing, up from needing to spend 1 minute observing a certain creature. The information gathered is generally more useful, though we'll see how resistance, immunities, and vulnerabilities shake out in the monster manual. Generally this is good information to know, especially for immunities to conditions. So you know what kind of conditions to use, especially like if you have a monk, it's useful to know if they're immune to stunning strike or immune to the stun condition. It does have a very limited number of uses, but you can again refresh it using a superiority die, which is always a nice option. Moving on to the level 10 feature, the improved combat superiority. Your superiority die becomes a D10. This is unchanged. Moving on. At level 15, you have Relentless. It says once per turn, whenever you use a maneuver, you can roll 1d8 and use the number rolled instead of expending the superiority die. This is much different than 2014, where it says when you roll initiative, if you have no superiority dice remaining, you regain one. So you just have one for that fight, essentially. So this is, you can kind of think of it at this level as downranking your superiority die to be able to use it for free. So this is a very powerful efficiency boost to be able to use this at least once per turn. You can basically use that Know Your Enemy feature basically freely now, because you can just use this 1d8 instead of the 1d10. It's even more amazing for maintaining like constant AC boost with things like the bait and switch or the evasive footwork, or even spamming disarm attempts on an enemy at least once per turn. Just a very, very powerful feature. It's just, just absolutely much better than the previous one. Finally, at level 18, we have Ultimate Combat Superiority. Your superiority die becomes a D12, same as it was in 2014, completely unchanged. Moving on, we're going to the champion. So the champion was sort of the just really plain, straightforward fighter from the 2014 rulebook, the originally 2014 Player's Handbook. It is still very much the simplest subclass for fighters, but it has had a number of pretty good changes. So starting at level 3, we have Improved Critical. Your attack rolls with weapons and unarmed strikes can score a critical hit of on a 19 or a 20 on the D20. So this is basically the same, but it now extends to unarmed strikes. The additional level 3 feature they get here is Remarkable Athlete. It says, thanks to your athleticism, you have advantage on initiative rolls and strength athletics checks. In addition, immediately after you score a critical hit, you can move up to half of your speed without provoking opportunity attacks. This is a feature that was previously available at level 7, but is now available at level 3. You lost several bonuses to different checks, but it's a lower level ability now, so we'd expect it to be balanced a little more. Advantage on initiative is very good. Athletics is still pretty good for breaking from grapples and maybe some other things. Movements on crit is pretty interesting, but that's basically just a ribbon. You're not going to, you are critting more often. It has some potential combos with things like the charger feat, if you can move away from a creature on your next attack and then run towards them again. Things you can do there, but something that's not going to come up quite as often. Moving on to level 7, it says additional fighting style. You gain another fighting style feat of your choice. This is now available at level 7, whereas previously it was the level 10 feature. So moving on to level 10, we have the Heroic Warrior feature. This is a brand new feature. It says the thrill of combat drives you toward victory. During combat, you can give yourself heroic inspiration whenever you start your turn without it. Again, new feature, we love to see it. And again, the heroic inspiration in 2024 is a little different than the 2014 version of inspiration, the generic inspiration that gives you advantage on a roll when you consume the use of it. Instead of giving you advantage on a roll, what it does in 2024 is it just allows you to re-roll any roll. You just re-roll the one die. You don't get to re-roll with advantage if you already had advantage on that roll. But you can re-roll damage. You can re-roll any kind of roll you're taking. The superiority die, you can re-roll that as well. All these different things you can re-roll. And again, this is once per round, so that's pretty incredible. I would have loved if they didn't include the whenever you start your turn without it part of it, because there's the rule that when you have heroic inspiration, if you already have it and then you get it again, you can give it to a player and kind of pass it around. So that would have been a very cool utility feature for the champion to kind of pass heroic inspiration around by holding onto it to themselves. But unfortunately not how it works, but it's still a very good feature regardless. Moving on to level 15, we have Superior Critical. It says your attack rolls with weapons and unarmed strikes can now score a critical hit on a roll of 18 to 20 on the d20. So much like the level 3 feature, this now extends to unarmed strikes. And then finally at level 18, we have the Survivor feature. So the Survivor feature says you have Defy Death, you have advantage on death saving throws. Moreover, when you roll an 18 to 20 on a death saving throw, you gain the benefit of rolling a 20 on it, which means that you come back to, I think it's 1 hit point, and then you can start your turn. This happens at the start of your turn, so you get your whole turn again. And then Heroic Rally says at the start of each of your turns, you regain hit points equal to 5 plus your Constitution modifier. If you are bloodied, which means you're at half health or lower, and have at least 1 hit point. So you can't get back up automatically from being unconscious, but as long as you have at least 1 hit point, you just heal a little bit once per turn, which is pretty great. This is very basically the same as the old version, but better when you actually drop to 0. And having advantage on the death saving throws and have the expanded crit range on the death saving throws is also just very good. I mean, we don't hope to be dying, but it's nice to have that reliability. Moving on to the Eldritch Knight. This is sort of the spellcasting, the Gish subclass for the fighter. At level 3, the subclass for the spellcasting feature for it. The subclass doesn't mention cantrips, but you do start with 2 wizard cantrips and get 1 more at level 10. This is basically the same as it was in 2014. You are no longer limited to certain schools of magic, which you were in 2014. You can only choose, it's like abjuration and something else. I can't quite remember what it was. But now you can just choose from any school of magic that's on specifically the wizard spell list, for which you have spell slots. And now you can use an arcane focus for your spellcasting focus, whereas previously, if you were playing that rules as written, you would have needed to have a component pouch, or you'd specifically need to have the components on you to cast all your spells. You couldn't use an arcane focus, but now you can. For the spell list changes for the Eldritch Knight, this is going to mirror the spell list changes for the wizard. So cantrips added to the Eldritch Knight are Elementalism, Mind Sliver, Thunderclap, and Toll the Dead. At level 1, you have added Ice Knife. Level 2 has added Arcane Vigor, Augury, Dragon's Breath, Enhance Ability, and Mind Spike. Level 3 has added Speak with Dead, Summon Fae, and Summon Undead. And then level 4 has added Charm Monster, Divination, Summon Aberration, Summon Construct, Summon Elemental, and Vitriolic Sphere. Spells marked with an asterisk here are new to the wizard spell list. In this case, both of the spells here are brand new to D&D in general. Other spells here were already added to the expanded spell list that was released in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, or maybe the Elemental Evil Player's Companion, other sort of supplemental materials. DM permitting, all other wizard spells from these spell books and on these optional spell lists would still be available to the Eldritch Knight as well. Moving on to the other level 3 feature, they have Weapon Bond. This is a very long, very wordy feature, so I just kind of summarized it here in the notes. I didn't want to fill up this table with all that information, but it says you can't bond to a weapon that's already bonded by another Eldritch Knight, or if another creature is already attuned to it. I assume people were pulling off shenanigans with bonded weapons, much like you could in Baldur's Gate 3 by having a bonded weapon and then selling it to a merchant and then summoning it back to you and then getting infinite gold that way within that game. I don't know what people were doing in 5th edition for that, but you can no longer, attune to someone else's, bond to someone else's attuned item, or somehow bond to another Eldritch Knight's bonded weapon, which makes sense. Moving on to level 7, we have War Magic. So it says when you take the attack action on your turn, you can replace one of the attacks with the casting of one of your wizard cantrips that has a casting time of an action. So this is very similar to the Blade Singer extra attack feature. So this is a massive improvement to the attack and or defensive power of an Eldritch Knight. You previously, it's again in 2014, it says when you use your action to cast a cantrip, you can make one weapon attack as a bonus action. Whereas now you're just replacing one of your attacks during your attack action with a cantrip. Just so much more offensive power, so much more possible defensive power. Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade and True Strike technically are all standout offensive options. The new Blade Ward is effectively a +1 to 4 AC with concentration. So if you're not going to be casting any other concentration spells during this combat, you can just give yourself a variable AC boost with one of these cantrips. Lightning Lure is also a possible standout here that can pull enemies into position and maybe set up cleave mastery opportunities, things like that. A lot of different things you can do besides just the Blooming Blade and Green Flame Blade, which are obviously probably the ones that you might be using most often, but there are other ones here that are pretty useful as well. At level 10, we have Eldritch Strike. You learn how to make your weapon strikes undercut the creature's ability to withstand your spells. When you hit a creature with an attack using a weapon, that creature has disadvantage on the next saving throw it makes against a spell you cast before the end of your next turn. There are minor wording differences, but it's effectively the same. Works well with things like Sentinel or Polar Master to set up more options to attack as a reaction. This way you don't have to wait sort of a whole round to get that disadvantage on the next spell that you cast. At level 15, you have Arcane Charge. It says, when you use your action surge, you can teleport up to 30 feet into an unoccupied space you can see. You can teleport before or after that additional action. This is basically unchanged, and a reminder that the action surge no longer allows the magic action. So if you're going to use action surge to cast a spell and do something else on the same turn, that the casting the spell has to be the main action and not the action surge action. It would have been kind of nice to see them undo that on this feature possibly for the Eldritch Knight to allow them to ignore that rule, since at this point full spellcasters they're not going to go 15 levels into Eldritch Knight just to get that. So it would have been nice, but they didn't get it, so it is what it is. At level 18, we have Improved War Magic. This is the capstone for the Eldritch Knight. It says, when you take the attack action on your turn, you can replace 2 of the attacks with a casting of one of your level 1 or 2 wizard spells that has the casting time of an action. So this is a massive improvement. It's not quite as powerful as it was in the playtest, but still very good. Giving up your action as it was in 2014 to cast a whole spell could feel pretty bad, at level 18. But giving up 2 of your attacks, which at this level you have 3, right? 5 is 2, 11 is 3, and then you get your 4th attack at 20, right? So you have 3 attacks. You can replace 2 of them to cast a spell, and then still attack at least once, and that once can still be a cantrip, right? I think so. So the defensive spells that you can cast here are like Blur and Mirror Image. Those are very powerful offensive spells. Include maybe your Thunder Waves, your Enlarge to buff yourself, Scorching Ray just to pump a bunch of damage. Utility spells like Fog Cloud, Long Strider, Darkness, Hold Person, Vortex Warp, Web, all very powerful things that you can do in place of two of your attacks at this level. Pretty powerful feature. First and second level spells aren't the strongest, but there's still a lot of very powerful things that you can do here. Especially like a Mirror Image is such a powerful defensive move. Again, just a very good capstone. I really like this one a lot. So moving on, we have the Psi Warrior, which is the final entry for the fighter subclasses in 2024. The psionic power feature at level 3 here. It is a big wall of text. The main thing that we need to know here is that the psionic dice size and number scaling is effectively unchanged. There's just a handy table that illustrates it's a little better. You do regain 1 expended psionic dice on each short rest, up from only being able to do this as a bonus action once per long rest, so you get more psionic energy die throughout the adventuring day, depending on how many short rests you take. And then the telekinetic movement part of this feature is considered a magic action, just an action before, but it's otherwise identical. However, this does mean that it is excluded from the extra action you get from Action Surge. Moving on to the level 7 feature, this is effectively the same. So you still have the Psi-empowered leap, you still have the telekinetic thrust. They updated the wording just a little bit to clean it up to be a little more updated to the modern type of language, but it is the same exact feature. At level 10, we have Guarded Mind. Again, the wording has changed very slightly, but it is effectively the same feature. At level 15, we have Bulwark of Force, and again, slight wording changes, but again, it is the same feature. Very kind of boring changes here. I mean, not really boring, there's just nothing happening. And then finally at level 18, again, Telekinetic Mastery. is unchanged. And I think this kind of makes sense because a lot of the, the trend that you'll notice is that subclasses that were released more recently already have very common, are already sort of modernized for the way that the game currently is being played. So we wouldn't expect to see so many changes, but it's just kind of a little funny that a class with so many subclass features is just so unchanged. But let's move on to our review here. So for the most improved subclass for the fighter, I'm going to have to give it to the champion, of course. This is very much like the Berserker Barbarian, where it was the, well, not really like the Berserker Barbarian, because the Berserker Barbarian was actively harmful to the Barbarian if they used the Frenzy feature, but it was still sort of the most basic, the most sort of like flagship subclass for the initial release of of those classes. The champion was that for the fighter as the most fighter of the fighters, the easiest one to play. It is still the easiest one to play by far, but it just has so many more quality of life improvements that it's just it feels much better to actually say I'm going to play a champion this time, right? And then moving on to the most nerfed, I don't know that there is really one to say here. There really isn't one. You might say the Psi Warrior just because it wasn't changed at all, but the Psi Warrior was always pretty good, and now they're just a little better. They get the their psionic dice a little more often throughout the adventuring day, but no real no real stinkers here with the fighters. And then moving on to the most hyped subclass, I think I gotta give that to the Eldritch Knight. Again, they had a lot of very good changes. This is a much more modern subclass than it was previously, because previously you had to give up a lot of offensive power just to be able to use these spells that are so underranked for the level that you get them at, because you are sort of a third caster or a 3/4 caster, whatever you want to call it. But now you don't really have to make those sacrifices. You get to, you get to cast the cantrip as part of in place of one of your attacks during your attack action. At your capstone, you can cast a first or second level spell in place of two of your attacks during the attack action, which allows very powerful defensive spells like mirror image and things like that. Very excited to eventually play an Eldritch Knight at some point, maybe just as part of a one shot or something like that, maybe. So let me know, what is your favorite subclass among the new subclasses or among the adjusted subclasses for fighters in 2024? Have you played any of them already yet? Let me know how that went down in the comments. And again, while you're going down to those comments, please hit that like button. And again, if you're watching these videos all the way through, or even listening to them all the way through, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We're going to move on to the monk, I believe is the next one in line here. So I hope to see you in that next video, and I'll see you next time.